Here, the institution of Cal Poly occupies the unceded homelands of the Yaktitu Titu Yaktilhini Northern Chumash tribe. As we gather today, we should keep this at the forefront of our minds, that their inherent continued right is to this land, and many of us here are simply guests. So for those of us who have the privilege to settle here by choice, we should recognize that as we confront and unpack issues relevant to our immigrant and refugee APIDA communities, we cannot call for racial justice without understanding the positions we may hold in a history of settlement and colonization of Indigenous lands. If you are joining from outside of SLO, you can also feel free to share where using this site. So with that, we have asked our wonderful panelists to share a little bit, not only about their knowledge and their experiences, but about themselves. So I am going to turn it over to our wonderful panelists to introduce themselves, starting, I believe, with Camille.
Hi, everyone. Wow, I'm first scary. No, just kidding. Hi, everyone. My name is Kamiya Lopez. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and sha. I am a MCC student assistant, as well as a third-year biomedical engineering major with a concentration in mechanical design. And I identify as a Filipina American with a Chinese and Korean background. And something that brings me pride in my APIDA identity is I grew up having the privilege to learn about my ancestors and learn about where I came from. And that's just something that I feel is really important. It was really important kind of like shaping who I am today. And I also grew up learning the languages and of my ancestors. And that's something that I really grew to appreciate, especially coming into these spaces. So yeah, I'm really excited to share everything with y'all. Yeah.
Okay, I'm next. Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Kanani Makikao, and I am the equity coordinator for Fraternity and Sorority Life. And I'm also the primary advisor for the United Sorority and Fraternity Council. Yeah, I think I have so many points of pride regarding my Hawaiian identity. And I think that like something that really sticks out to me is the way I was raised to understand that I'm never alone, even when I'm far away or screw up monumentally. So like many folks, I've been through some very difficult times in my life, and the Hawaiian emphasis on family culture has lifted me from my knees more times than I can count. Also, I was raised to represent my last name with pride, even fight if I needed to, and to think about how my actions might represent my family. And so for me, this is a gift in my life because I have always needed an anchor, like a tether that grounds me, because I do have a way of drifting at times or focusing on shame that ultimately holds me back. And another point of pride I have is that many Hawaiians are aware of the colonization of Hawaii, of how that impacts our lives today, and how the most profitable industry in Hawaii, tourism, right, makes the islands vulnerable in almost every facet of livelihood. And I think there is this narrative that local people don't understand the complexities of what is happening because of colonization, and that's just not the case. You know, if I think my uncles and aunties and cousins might not use academic language to describe their experience, but they for sure know things like that children with asthma on Maui has increased 33% because Dole has abandoned the pineapple fields in Maui. And nothing can grow in these large parcels of land, which would aid in diffusing the the volcanic fog that comes over from Mauna Kea. Yeah, I'm going on and on. So thank you. I appreciate being here.
Hi, everyone. My name is Anusha Sauda, pronouns she, her, hers. I'm a graphic design major and a second year here at Cal Poly. And I'm a Desi American. And I wanted to do like quite a bit of reflection on this question, what brings you pride in your APIDA identity? So I have kind of a long-winded answer for you that I'm just gonna read off. So bear with me, please. So what brings you pride in your APIDA identity? I used to feel shame when I would see a big bustling Indian family at the park or on a hike or at the airport or anywhere, really. I find this sad now, all that time I spent feeling ashamed and irritated of people who refused to hide like me. I couldn't comprehend how they could be so unabashed by their brownness. They would speak loudly and unapologetically in Hindi or Gujarati or Telugu or another language that seemed too harsh to my ears, and I would wish they would try to blend in a little more, stop projecting their voices so much, assimilate. I did it, so why can't they? I would tense up when it was my own immigrant South Indian parents speaking in their thick accents or pronouncing something wrong while speaking to the cashier at the grocery store. Because I rejected being brown for so long and with so much effort at school, in other public spaces, and even at home, I started to convince myself of the ridiculous notion that I was basically a white person and the color of my skin was giving me away. And in every space, I had to quickly prove that I could be whiter than the white girl next to me for fear that they would label me as brown. But I never really fit into this forced whiteness. The first time I recall clearly feeling proud of being brown was my junior year of high school. I found myself in the most Asian friend group I'd ever been in, and I found myself the most comfortable than I'd ever been before. This was no coincidence. My friends were a lot more in tune with their APIDA identities than I was, and it blew my mind that I had a choice in the matter. I had taken it upon myself starting in elementary school, after moving to a predominantly white neighborhood and feeling extremely brown, to bully myself into erasing my Desi identity so that no one else could do it to me. There had still been microaggressions and racist remarks that would affect me a lot more than I would like to admit, but the worst of it was self-inflicted. My friends were so Indian, so Korean, so proud of their ethnic food, music, and customs. And the best part was they could talk about their experiences, and their experiences were so similar to mine. Everything I felt on a daily basis was voiced all of a sudden. They were conjured up and real. From here on out, slowly but surely, I would open up. Even though it was just my 4 friends at our lunch table, I felt as though I was part of a community for the first time. We would tell stories about our controlling parents and make fun of the ignorant white kids at school and how they would never understand our controlling parents. As a sophomore in college now on a predominantly white campus, I am the most secure of my APIDA identity than ever before, and I feel so liberated. I love sharing my story and hearing others in my community, do the same, and I'm so thankful for opportunities like this one to do so. I'm proud of how Indians cook chicken so that the flavors seep all the way through to the bone, or the vibrant colors of saris and the elaborate wedding customs, but I'm the most proud of the way that we all go through this shared journey of overcoming the shame that we are forced to feel about ourselves. The media's portrayal of the socially awkward, skinny Indian kid forced us to feel that way. The relentless comments about the smell of our food made us feel that way. The mockery of our language, the Eurocentric beauty standards, and the stereotypes being shoved down our throats forced us to feel that way. And when I see other Indians glowing because they're so clearly proud of being Indian, it brings me so much pride. And that's my answer.
I am really sad that I have to go after that. It's going to be anticlimactic. That was beautiful, Anusha. So my name is Grace Gay, pronouns she, her, hers. I am professor in ethnic studies and also currently interim chair of communication studies. I am especially proud of one aspect of my Taiwanese heritage, which is the importance of family, which I think others have mentioned, but I wanted to share a story that maybe is like a little bit too much information, but I will share it as an illustration. Growing up, I shared everything. I think there's like a, like a general characterization of Asians as collectivist versus individual. I feel like that's a very maybe anthropologists or anthropological term for it. That's not the word I think we would use to describe ourselves. Of course, my parents would never say like, oh, we're collectivist people. For them, they're like, family is everything. And that, as a kid drove me crazy. But it was also the existence that I lived. And I think now that I'm partially grown, I'll say I'm just partially grown up, I can reflect back and realize how invaluable this idea was that I think the words don't quite capture. So I have two sisters, and especially with one sister, we shared a room, we shared everything. And it's, I think another term is ride or die, right? Like this is what family means. And it wasn't until I left college that it made me realize how inseparable we had been and how what it meant to be family. We had to, so this is a physical manifestation. We had to go through our closet to separate out what will now become mine and what will become hers, all the way down to our underwear. We just had like a communal drawer for, that, our clothes, everything. And so in reflecting back, and now that I have my own children, I realize it's a value that I think just I instill in my kids. They have to learn how to share everything, and they work it out. And there's a difference. They become sort of, I think, not focused on material things or possessiveness, like this is mine, this is yours. So that to me is something that I feel like has been super valuable, and I feel like no one has quite been able to capture that description of that, quote unquote collectivist value. And then another one I'll throw in there. I asked my mom, one day, because I'm trying to learn Taiwanese, which is different from Mandarin. It's a different language, different. I don't even think you can call it dialect. I was like, what's the Taiwanese word for family? And she said the translation is the people of at my house. So there's not even, so the word family is also, complicated too. It's not an easy description or not an easy translation. So I think for me, that means something beyond just your blood kin, right? That it's the people of your house, and however expansive that house is in your communities, it's the people of your house.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing such beautiful anecdotes and beautiful experiences, everyone. Grace, I really resonate with that last one. I think about how many different people can come through a house, especially in APIDA communities, whether, that's relatives, grandfathers, cousins, and people who just stay. And I think we really want to expand that feeling of family and community to the community that we have here at Cal Poly as well. And so with that thought, I am going to go into our questions for the evening. We have 4 kind of main points that we're going to cover with some sub questions in between if we have the time. I will be watching the chat, but if you want to make sure that I see something for if we have time at the end for audience questions, please direct message me so that I can keep my eye on that. Otherwise, there's no guarantee that things won't get lost in the very excited cheering that is bound to happen when people share their answers. So with that, we will go into our first question. For you all, again, we do have the speaking order, so please feel free to use that if that makes you feel comfortable. Our first question here is, we have had a very interesting last year, I think, for a lot of APIDA communities, for a lot of people in the world, but especially when we think about our place in this country and kind of the larger fight for racial justice that goes on. So what was this past year like for you and the APIDA communities as you have seen it and as you have experienced it? Now, it's a broad question, but I trust y'all and the direction that you want to take.
I personally think that something that I've observed throughout this year, especially with all of the tragedies that are happening within our communities, is a lot of denial. So like what I said before, I identify as a Philippine American. So in my household, it's very, very Philippine centric, from what's on the walls, from what's spoken out of our mouths, from the food, from everything. And a big aspect of the Philippine community that I grew up in is that a majority of like my friends, parents, as well as a lot of the adults in my life are immigrants from the Philippines. So kind of a small history lesson. The Philippines was occupied by the US. Yeah. And because of that, a lot of virtues, quote unquote, of Americanization were really shoved down the Philippine people's mouths, really shoved down their throats. And just like the sentiments of manifest destiny, America is so great, it's going to protect us and provide us with all of these amazing opportunities, was really shoved down the people's throats, or the folks that I've had the opportunity to meet in my lifetime, especially my parents. So a lot of this was kind of like in denial and shock, like, oh, like I thought this only happened to this demographic of people. Like, why are we the targets now? Like, why are we the folks facing these kinds of oppressions now, when we've been so kind of like loyally and graciously kind of folding ourselves into this mold of becoming as close to white as possible. So that's kind of something that I've really experienced in my community. It's been a lot to process, in a sense. Like my dad has a lot of very, kind of like, I don't want to say like right-winged or anything like that, but very like microaggressive ways of referring to people, and like, kind of like a lot of the things that you'd expect, not like, a Filipino man to say, but like you just expect like, a Southern, like cis straight white male to say in spaces. Unfortunately, sorry if that was super general. But yeah, like those kinds of things come out of his mouth on the daily. And, it's our job, it was my job in my house to catch him when that happens. And so sometimes I need to sit him down and be like, okay, look, like, you're not a white man. And that's something that I really had to explain to him, which was wild, just because of that kind of like pride of Americanization, that he grew up with. And so it's been a lot of denial coming from my family that these things are happening to the APIDA community, and that people that look like us are being targeted, just as it's been for a lot of people of marginalized communities like these in the past and whatnot. So it's taken a lot of processing in that end, to kind of teach my family that, like, I don't want to say like all of the burden was put on me to teach them that we are like, a marginalized community. We are a part of that community. So we shouldn't be, in a sense, siding with the oppressors, and we shouldn't be supporting them. We should be kind of collectively coming together and supporting folks of other marginalized identities so we could rise up against it. And that's just something that I've really wanted to emphasize within my family. And it's taken a really long time. It's still in the process of going, but that's kind of just something that I wanted to point out, is just that denial and that feeling like, oh, we've done everything we can to be as white as possible, but we're still being oppressed. And that's just something that I've personally noticed in my own, I guess, sphere.
Thanks, Camille. I've also shared some of those experiences, so it was good that someone was talking about that. This year has been challenging, to say the least, right? And it's been the case. That's been the case for so many of us. And when I think back, I find myself reflecting on the ways the pandemic really exacerbated so many inequities that persisted prior to the pandemic too. And so the national spotlight on not only the police violence and anti-Blackness, but the xenophobia and anti-Asian violence, health disparities amongst our BIPOC communities, anti-immigrant and anti-LGBTQ policies. Don't forget white supremacy storming the Capitol. I mean, the list really, it goes on, and it was really overwhelming. I felt like as a student affairs professional and someone who holds one of the few DEI specific positions on this campus, I felt like there was unprecedented pressure to support our most marginalized students, and to ensure that they felt supported and seen, and then simultaneously working to introduce or reconstruct new practices and policies rooted in equity and racial justice. Because this work is personal to me, and for that reason, I always feel a great responsibility to the work. But this year with the pandemic and the social isolation, the pressure felt even heavier. So seeing APIDA elders who look like my grandmother being targeted across the country, while at the same time having to fight the urge to get on the first flight home to Maui, so I could breathe in the healing air of Maui, and feel the warmth of my grandmother, because this is the only way I could keep her safe, right, is staying away. And that for me was a truly heartbreaking juxtaposition. So all that is to say, I don't truly have the words to explain what this past year was like, but I am thankful to be in the space together in community, and I hope, I look forward to continuing to come together as we persist beyond the pandemic, and our continued pursuit of equity and justice.
Yeah, I mean, this year has been really rough, clearly, as both of you have given examples of, and there's always been for centuries hate crimes on APIDA individuals. But I think that if this pandemic has showed us anything, it shows that our country loves to take 2 steps forward and then 3 steps back. Like, people are just always looking for an excuse to be racist openly towards people, whether it makes sense or not, because clearly it doesn't ever make sense, or there's no excuse for that. And just like a more personal experience is the fact that the pandemic has caused a lot of young adults or college students to go back home when they got out of their household. And that's just an example that I can share, because I feel like a lot of APIDA individuals have immigrant parents who hold very conservative beliefs that, like Camille was starting to speak on that a little bit. And that just kind of makes certain households a little bit of an unsafe environment, and that you don't really realize that until you leave and then go back and just realize how many views are coming out in the open. Maybe it's just because I'm growing up, so now I realize I see my parents as people and I see the beliefs that they hold, and they're very harmful, and it's exhausting to live in that environment, because I had to go home for a year because of COVID, obviously. And it was just exhausting, day to day, having those conversations, and they're so important to have, but burnout is real. And just learning who your people who raised you, who they truly are, that's a very jarring experience. And yeah, as a, what Camille was saying is that her parents didn't, or I don't know if you're talking about your parents, but your family kind of, they associate themselves with whiteness because they try so hard to be, perceived as white. And my family does that too. And that has really played a role in how I've seen myself. And now that I'm openly queer with my family, it's just another layer that they don't understand. And so that's what this year has done to me personally, is just made my home kind of a distant place that I don't super resonate with anymore. But a highlight this year that I've noticed is that on TikTok and stuff, or Instagram, there's been a lot of APIDA representation, just with my age group or other age groups. And I love seeing that. I think that's no small feat. Just seeing that is very brightening to me, because you just see people loving themselves on social media, and that's super important. And I love to see that.
Yeah, I think in so many ways, I just want to echo what everyone has already stated. And I was thinking, it's not just for some, it's, being forced to go back home in a sense, but I think for others, it's not being able to be with family at all. Not having seen my, any relatives for over a year, basically a year and a half. is also very strange, you know, given how important family is and not knowing truly how they're doing, right? Like you only get their version that they want you to hear in terms of how they're doing. And my parents are very protective, but I think this year obviously has thrown everyone off balance, you know, from our interpersonal levels and all the way up to our institutions and our norms, you know, that we previously were used to. And I think what all of that has highlighted, and I think what the other panelists are saying too, is this is when we realize also just how much ignorance, willful or not, right? How much ignorance there is, and these conditions when we're thrown off balance, that comes out in fiercer ways, right? You know, in terms of violence, in terms of, you know, the difficult conversations or non-conversations with family, with no one understanding what is happening to APIDA communities in terms of rise of anti-Asian violence or understanding of things like the model minority myth. And I think here specifically at Cal Poly, I feel like we also have just had a long history of not having those story sharers or teachers, you know, when we're so understaffed, under-resourced. And shout out to Olivia and Lillian and, you know, all the student assistants in the MCC for the incredible work that they've done, you know, all through the year, but especially the lineup for this month. Like that is so needed, but it's also been a hard year to get any work done, one, and then to get work done to try and address these, you know, violences and issues that have been coming out in these fierce ways. So that, you know, one of the things that I've seen is the communities at Cal Poly scrambling and constantly reacting to all these different incidents that have happened, and then having that burden and responsibility to help explain or help communicate, you know, either on behalf of the university or to help inform the university or just other, you know, constituents at the community. And at this point, you know, I think a lot of us are just tired, like beyond tired, right? And so this year, we're hard workers, right? That's the stereotype. But man, this year is just ridiculous.
Yeah, I would really like to challenge that stereotype by working a little less hard. I will accept the shout out from Grace. Thank you. I think that what we do as staff on this campus and what the students do who are involved with our centers and communities, we do out of passion and out of love for each other. But we all also wouldn't say no if you wanted to buy us coffee or lunch at some point. So just keep that in mind. Grace, I think you also touched on where I want to go with this question, which is how has this year reflected at Cal Poly? So the question here is, speaking from your own position and experiences, what do you see as some of the biggest challenges facing APIDAs at Cal Poly on our physical virtual campus? And how do these connect to the larger issues that you talked about, and even the smaller issues that you talked about within your families and your kind of spheres of influence? So I will pop that in the chat because it's a long one, but I would love to hear about connections to Cal Poly if anyone wants to speak on that.
Can I jump in? I know we have an order, a default order, but I'm like, I don't want to keep going last. I think one of the biggest challenges that I've been seeing, you know, for the APIDA community specifically is this what about meism, you know, and I get that APIDA folks, you know, that they feel invisible, and then the ignorance I was just talking about and lack of education or colonial mentality and the kind of brainwashing or whitewashing. Like I understand, you know, that sense of invisibility, but then the what about meism I think is one of the biggest challenges that we have to face and face consistently. And to be able to keep in mind that the bigger project is abolition, right? Or decolonization, and you know, anti-racist work that we're all of us are bound together in that larger project versus like, how can I get my piece, right? How can I make sure like the people of my house, right? And that kind of territoriality, that's not going to undermine that larger project.
Grace, I'm going to ask you to clarify what you mean by whataboutism in case anyone in attendance isn't familiar with the term.
Oh, you know, just like comments that, so some of the comments about like anti-Asian violence and people using Black Lives Matter as a way to compare like, well, what about Asian Americans? We face violence too. Or, you know, like this, as if it's a zero-sum game, right? Like either they get attention, we should get that same attention too. But then not really getting at the heart of the problem here, which is racism, right? White supremacy, you know, and then focusing it more on this like horizontal level and looking at your like how other people are treated and how you're not treated or seen, versus looking like more aspirationally, right?
Yeah, thank you. And I think it's so true, that sort of sense of scarcity that, you know, there's only so much to go around is something that is really bred and perpetrated by white supremacy and sort of just like capitalist culture that we have in this country. Thank you for clarifying that. Do any of our other panelists have thoughts on how they've seen the effects of this year show up at Cal Poly?
Yeah, I can speak on that, even though I never like going after Grace. She's amazing. So when Grace was talking, I also, I've had this idea that one of the biggest challenges that we have are like rooted in the monolithic approach to equity within the APIDA community. And I think this is an issue our campus and higher education, in higher education more broadly. And what I mean by that is that I feel like the vastness of diversity found in the APIDA community is rarely disaggregated when looking at equity gaps. And I have seen this start to improve a bit, but not enough. So particularly because for so long, when folks are talking about our community, they are not talking about Southeast Asian communities or our Desi American communities. And if we're not talking about it, then the needs of those communities are being lost under this monolith, right? And we're not truly serving our APIDA community to the fullest capacity. And so personally, I experienced this disconnect on a small scale when I hear folks talk about like the Hawaiian Islands, because we often only hear the stories of like beautiful beaches and tourist hotspots, not of the social inequities that locals bear the burden of, because they go unseen, right? Behind surf lessons, Mai Tais. So we don't hear the story of Hawaii being 27th in the country for education, the disappearance of the indigenous language, and we don't hear about the Hawaiian pidgin language created out of Hawaii's colonization and the desire to maintain cultural roots, deemed as a sign of poor intellect, which is not true at all. And then I also want to point out, though, that I'm not encouraging a deficit approach to serving my people, because we are Maui built, and we are powerful and beautiful people. However, how can anyone truly serve our needs if the voices are not central to the conversation? So creating space where the APIDA community can exist, like not as a monolith, but as a community connected by our diverse histories, cultures, and traditions, And I think that will allow us to better understand the needs of the APIDA community at Cal Poly and adequately meet those needs.
I just kind of wanted to echo something that Dr. A was talking about in terms of whataboutism, like a kind of small anecdote. I remember something that has really stuck in my head from last year's CLA teach-ins was there was like an individual, it was like during, I think, Lillian and Olivia's teach-in on like racial triangulation. And there was an individual that asked a question, something along the lines of, why should this matter to me? Like, I'm only gonna be at Cal Poly for so long. And that was just like so appalling to hear at the moment. It sounded really selfish. And I know like my friends that were there as well as me were really like, what? Like, it's wild to think how a person's thought bubble can be so constrained into one thing that they don't think about the overall liberation of a lot of people. So that was something that really appalled me at the moment. And as I continued to kind of delve within the APIDA community, talking to folks and just like getting to know more people, I kind of saw this trend of there was this big divide between okay, what about it? Like, why is this relevant in my life? And there was like a lot of folks on that end, and there was a lot of folks on the other end calling for reform, calling for change. And I feel like that's something that should be discussed and something that should be kind of acknowledged. Like, why are there folks on this end of the spectrum, and why are there folks on this other end of the spectrum that share in this APIDA identity? And that's something that, you know, I've been trying to think about for a little bit. Yeah, and also just to build on about the question that Olivia posed, I feel like another issue it's not only evident on Cal Poly's campus throughout the student body, but it's also like evident in a lot of other student bodies all throughout the country, is finding this kind of like difference between being performative and actually taking like meaningful and intentional action when you're trying to advocate for something. So like, you know, there's a really big difference between posting a Black square and posting about resources. But there's so much more that can be done besides posting. There's so much dialogue that can happen. And though those dialogues are available through like a lot of resources on campus, I feel like it should be more kind of like emphasized within our organizations throughout campus. Like, yes, there are organizations that partake in these discussions that want to intentionally make change, but there's also organizations that need to kind of get with that program if possible, just because they influence so many students. And it would be great to see a lot more students getting into these conversations with influence and with encouragement by their respective organizations. So that's kind of something I wanted to touch upon as well.
Yeah, Anusha, did you have anything to add? It's also okay if you don't.
I thought that was a really good point, all of you. And Camille, you started talking about like other, okay, sorry, let me start over. There's like this kind of idea that I've seen in myself and other APIDA individuals, that kind of, because we all identify as POC, we are kind of exempt from like doing the work to like realize that we have privilege and like educate ourselves on how to use our privilege to help like Black and Indigenous folk and people like that. And so I think that that's another thing that I just wanted to add. And yeah, that's it.
Yeah, thank you all so much for reflecting on our campus and the communities who we have around us. I think that you all spoke so beautifully to this feeling of connectedness, and that goes not only for the connectedness that we need in order to really advocate for ourselves and communities who are not our own communities, but also to really recognize like how insidious the connectedness of white supremacy is, right? If we don't realize that and how deep it goes and how wide it spans, we can't really do the work of reaching for liberation. So you all kind of started to speak to this, I think, in the work that you all do in your own spheres of influence, with your own families, with your own peer groups. But I would really like to know, from your perspective, how do you see APIDAs fitting into the larger struggle for racial justice? What are the challenges we need to overcome to build coalition with other communities of color? And to kind of wrap up, why is this work important to you from the experiences that you've had?
Oh, sorry. I think that in terms of a challenge that we need to overcome is kind of like helping break the chain of ignorance and silence within our communities. Of course, there are folks that are within the APIDA community that are educating audiences, that there are people that are willing to stand in solidarity within this APIDA sphere, but there are also so many people that just don't care, and so many people that are so complacent in their space, or either they're being complacent, or maybe they just have a fear of losing their privileges and losing their spot in the line of proximity to whiteness, right? So that's just something that I feel could serve as a big challenge. Also from my personal experience, it has served as a big challenge when trying to educate people within my communities, right? So yeah, that serves as a challenge. And kind of going off of the question, why is this work important? For me, I have this thing in my head that if I could help at least one person come to a realization of the importance of collective liberation, or come to the conclusion that, that white supremacy and proximity to whiteness is such a huge problem that's affecting not only the APIDA communities, but also all communities, that it's such a prevalent thing within the community, and just help them come to that realization, then that's a job well done in my book. Of course, don't help one person, or don't educate one person. Spread your work as much as you can within your capacity, but that's kind of my mindset when it comes to that. There have been many times when I've been having conversations about this where I've been dismissed, but in my brain cell, persistence is key, but also take care of yourself. But persistence is key. Making sure that you're practicing what you preach, and you're being consistent, being knowledgeable, using the right referencing the right resources. So if people drop the link, where's the source, you have it, right? You're being credible when you want to go out and educate, or when you want to have these really important conversations. So that's kind of a tangent in a sense. But like what I said, if we could help at least one person come to these realizations, then that information can have the potential to continue to spread to wider audiences. And who knows, hopefully this information and these messages of collective liberation can spread as far as possible if we continue to educate folks. And yeah.
Yeah, going off of what Camille said, I was thinking about this quote from Lila Watson, and she said, "If you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is tied up with mine, then let us work together." And I think that's how I like to think about it. And I think that quote beautifully sums up our role in racial justice for our BIPOC communities and their intersecting identities. In order to understand what that looks like more practically in how I show up in spaces, I'm consistently examining the intersections of my privilege and my marginalization in order to assess what the risks and advocacy must and should look like in a pursuit of collective liberation. And why is this? I think the second question was, why is this work important from your own perspective, from your own experience? I was an underrepresented student that went from Maui to North Idaho and failed miserably. And seeing folks that feel isolated, unintended isolation, because some folks do like to be by themselves, really, really bothers me because of my own experience. And so when I'm working with the students in fraternity and sorority life, and I see that a sense of community and belonging is cultivated in their organizations, that's why I really push on when I'm overwhelmed or tired, like this past year has done.
I got a quote to follow Kanani's quote. I thought that was a great point to raise. This is also a shout out to the Navarros in ethnic studies who turned our family onto the Mandalorian. But this idea of our liberation being bound together, I think, you know, on the one hand, we need to be recognized, right, for our diverse identities within the APIDA community. But I think we can't just dwell on, like, I just want to be seen for who, you know, just my identity. It has to go beyond that. And in The Mandalorian, he says, you know, Mandalorian, it's not a race, it's a creed. And so I think in some ways that APIDA category, we should see it in that way, right? Like that identity is one that is supposed to be bound up in liberation, right? Not just about recognizing our identities. And so, you know, I just wanted to throw that in there. Like if we could think of APIDA as not a race, but a creed, right? And that creed is being tied to this shared and liberation, right? Ones that we're bound together. And may the force be with you.
Yeah, so the whole idea of the model minority myth, I think, I just want to speak on that. It creates a divide between APIDA communities and other POC, and it's always been really confusing to me. I never really understood it, but this idea really puts pressure on us to overcome the blatant racism and policies that are being put against us. And we have to overcome that and become successful, but we will only ever be below a white man in society. And I think that this misjudgment that Asians are hardworking or whatever, it's a misconception that most APIDA individuals are rich or higher socioeconomic standing, but a large majority of people are living under the poverty line, and that number is increasing. So I just wanted to add that. And just recently, being an APIDA person with socioeconomic privilege, I have kind of woken up to how I am perpetuating like racism on other folk. And we do have closer proximity to whiteness, and I benefit from systems of oppression every day, which is something I've only just begun to acknowledge, because it's really hard to, you know, just like wake up to that idea. It changes your whole world. And it's easy to feel that as a POC who has been wronged, you don't need to put in the work. I mentioned this earlier. You don't need to put in the work to help other marginalized communities, but that's extremely harmful and destructive and not progressive at all.
Yeah, thank you all for these bits of very important education that you've sprinkled throughout your answers. I will do a little bit of my own education too. The term Asian American was inherently political when it was coined. Before that, we were called Orientals, Asiatics. And so Asian American was something that we created for ourselves. And so as a sense of collectiveness in needing to come together as a community to kind of fight the systems of oppression and racism that were happening in sort of the mid 20th century, that was an identity that we created for ourselves. And I think it's really important to honor the history of that term, Asian American, and kind of translate it to where we are today with our APIDA communities. So obviously it is so important to recognize the diversity in our communities, to be able to serve our communities, but also know that there is power in coming together and there is power in that collectiveness. So thank you all for reflecting. I actually want to take an audience question right now because I think it's really relevant. So the question that we have here is, with the recent visibility and spotlight on the APIDA community, how have you been feeling about this new attention to our communities?
It's hard to say good to that question. Well, for multiple reasons. I guess there's like a personal kind of reaction, and then there's also like a larger one. I think I'm still processing this, but it was a strange thing to have, you know, a lot of people reach out to me directly, you know, to check in on me, and I appreciated the care and the love that involved. But I like I said, I'm still processing this. It was a strange thing to then, like, me personally becoming hyper visible because of the violences that were happening to other Asian American, Asian immigrant, you know, elders. And then on an institutional level, you know, sometimes it's like there is that silver lining, you know, to be recognized and to have the recognition that resources need to be committed, or, you know, staff needs to be committed in order to change, you know, the broader project of changing society, right? Like, it can happen through the university as an institution, for education, or for hopefully unlearning, right? But it's also been awkward as well. You know, sometimes the attention is, and you know, I guess I'll be gracious here. It's clumsy, but it's also better than nothing, right? And so I think, yeah, it's hard. Sometimes, yeah, I'll leave it at that. I appreciate it, but at the same time, it also highlights how if it hasn't been done before, that's part of the reason why there's that awkwardness, right? Because people just don't know how to respond because they never responded before, right? Or didn't respond consistently. And you just see a lot of that, people making stuff up, right, as we're going along. Yeah.
I think my answer won't be as inherently positive as Professor Ye's, but I think for me, it's just like kind of like, for lack of better terms, like a fear of like increased like racist incidences. Like, you know, I mean, at Cal Poly, I've heard it all. To be quite honest, unfortunately, I've heard it all. And so, you know, I just wouldn't think anything would faze me. But yeah, like Professor says, it's a really hard question to kind of grasp. But not only like increased incidences towards me and my respective identities, but also like towards, you know, my peers, especially like with my family. Like, especially since a lot of the people that are being targeted in these tragedies are older individuals. Like, I have a grandma at home. I live in like a multi-generational household, so that's something that's very difficult. Like, you know, kind of like what Kanani was saying earlier, with like, I want to go home and, you know, take care of my grandma, but can't really do that. But also like, just keep an eye out for my grandma, but you know, it's hard to do too. So that's been kind of something that I've been thinking of, you know, like even before the pandemic, I was really hearing a lot of things, and I just imagine like now, like I have to be more hyper alert in that sense, which is quite unfortunate. But yeah, but I think I can end on something hopefully positive. I feel like now, because the APIDA community has been more, like, I guess, more spotlighted, people are now starting to realize, or like the general population is now starting to realize that there are trying to realize like the diversity within the APIDA sphere, right? It's not, we're not all Chinese, y'all. Yeah, and that's definitely something that I find positive out of this, hopefully. Yeah, like, you know, people are being more aware about the diversity within like the APIDA community as a whole, and, you know, trying to learn more about these what like different cultures within the APIDA community, which is something that I find great, despite the circumstance, in a sense. So yeah, that was a very difficult question, but thank you whoever asked it.
I want to give Kanani and Anusha space if you want to answer as well. If not, that's also fine. I know this was off the cuff.
Just going off of that, I think that ignorance really is blissful, and I've kind of been, with this newfound attention, it's just a really vulnerable feeling. I don't really know what to do with it, and like it's just scary. But it's definitely a positive thing, even though it can be scary, because with this spotlight, we can like take it from here and like actually have space to like talk about our experiences and things like that. But obviously, it's scary to be vulnerable. So like I'm scared right now being here as a panelist, but yeah, it's definitely helpful and good.
Thank you for being here despite that and sharing your knowledge.
Yes. I think for me, the concept that this year has been a catalyst for so many things is one I struggle with a lot. And sometimes actually I find it offensive. And at the same time, like the possibilities of the attention in terms of resources for our communities is something that I look forward to. So basically, I feel all of you, and I was thinking about what Grace said, so that's what brought that to mind.
Kanani said the possibility of resources. So something else to keep in mind for anyone who's in the audience. I really think this is an interesting question to reflect on. I think that in many ways we have been thrust into a spotlight, and many of us haven't been prepared to be in that spotlight. And I think that was a bit of our privilege for a lot of our lives, to not necessarily have to be there, to be advocating not for only for ourselves, but for Black people, Indigenous people, other people of color alongside us. So the next question that we have is about organizing and about this newfound visibility. So I think that if we think in the past recent years, we've rarely seen this kind of large scale organizing from APIDA communities that has been happening right now. So what advice, encouragement, or other words of wisdom can you give to folks who are just now rising to meet this tide of activism and consciousness?
It's another really great question. I know this question was sent to us before, but I was still like processing it. I feel like, I guess a piece of advice can be, even how much you think you're educated into something, there's always so much more to learn. And just being open to learning is really important if we want to have insightful conversations, if we want to have intentional conversations and connect with people in order to educate. And that's something that's really important in that sense. And also don't be afraid to question things. There's a lot of examples of activism out there, good and bad. And, you know, being more familiar with what is good and what is bad. Sorry if that sounds pretty vague, but, and, you know, being familiar with those things can like help you kind of think about what side do I want to be on, or like, how do I want to express my thoughts on this, or how do I want to spend my time advocating for this cause, like for example. So I feel like that's really important too, like don't be afraid to question things. A good example of this is like really specific, but there's this one TikToker who in the beginning, you know, they're an APIDA person with a big platform, and they were saying all of these things about like activism and like, you know, protect the APIDA community, and like, you know, they're very, very strong in their solidarity with like Black Lives Matter, and in uplifting the voices of BIPOC folks and you know, at the time they seemed like pretty great, but if you really listen to their message, a lot of the things were very geared to being like bringing down like APIDA folks, which was kind of strange. Like, I don't know, I want to at this person so bad, but I don't know if I can. But yeah, like face value, that individual's content seemed to be, you know, helpful, seemed to be intersectional, seemed to want to kind of like promote this collective activism and this like collective liberation. But if you really listen to what they were saying, it was at the cost of bringing down other marginalized communities. So there was nothing collective about it in a sense. It was either they're bad and they're good, just putting, you know, putting BIPOC communities against each other, which is strange, right? So, you know, that was a time when I had to be like, okay, yeah, no, bye. Like, I don't need this in my feed. I don't need this content. This is not helping me become more educated. And so that's kind of like a really small example of that. But yeah, don't be afraid to question things and just be open to learning. That's something that I find really important in this work. So yes.
Something I want to highlight about what you said, Camille, is I think we occupy a really interesting position. And I think this applies to a lot of people who do hold like some kind of marginalized identity, where sometimes we can't understand how we can be oppressed and also agents of oppression at the same time. I think that's something that we always have to be teasing out as we kind of, you know, face this new tide of APIDA activism and organizing. But I'll give it back to the panelists.
I just wanted to address the social media aspect of, you know, the activism, especially during the pandemic, I think really ramped up. And so I'm new to it, and I, you know, feel more and more that I'm just from a different era. You know, so part of that is still so strange to me, and I have to turn it off too because it gets too overwhelming. But I think part of it is that it's an interesting way of building relationships, you know, because you have this immense network, and especially when people can't physically come together. And so I see that as like one great potential. And then there's been so many individuals that I can't name because I'm not super familiar, but that have, you know, huge amounts of following and kind of become like very almost like the representative, right? Or like the voice that people turn to or follow, and then shape their discourse. And this is me being, I feel like like an old curmudgeon, but I'm like, activism has been, you know, around for a long time, even, you know, among Asian American communities, going back to the 19th century, you know, so it's not new. And I think there's a lot that that is valuable in terms of turning to like our ancestors, you know, in this struggle. And so my short answer is coming to this sort of rising tide of activism, do your homework, right? The relationships are important. Being able to parse out like what is just new and shiny, you know, because I think that's kind of what Camille is pointing out. Like this is a person who because of the technology is able to amplify what they're saying, but if you don't do your homework, right? If you don't know your history and you don't know the people who have been doing this work and the lessons that they've learned, then I think you can become, it's easy to become misguided, right? In that way, with these sorts of newer versions or folks that are new, you know, to some of this work. So yeah, the relationship building, the doing your homework, I think that's a big thing. And then humility, right? Like knowing what your limits are. And if you build those good relationships, you know, those places where you'll falter or where you're not as strong or you don't have that information, you know, like have the humility to be able to do the work and rely on others that can point you the right way, right? Yes, I'm always like, please explain and translate this to me.
Yeah, Grace would like everyone to take an ethnic studies class. I think that's what she's saying. I also do want to, again, emphasize something that you said about really knowing our history. There have been APIDA people in the United States who have been organizing for decades, for even, you know, centuries back. And I think that if we don't learn about that and if we don't acknowledge those histories and whoever came before us, we can't see ourselves in that work. You know, there were Asian American students who joined the Third World Liberation Front to help make ethnic studies a thing, to invent ethnic studies, basically. I'm not saying anyone should set anything on campus on fire, but they did do that back in the 60s. So you can keep that one in mind too. Kanani, would you like to add anything to the question?
Yeah, so I guess I'll add on that find time to rest and heal, right? That's a common one. And it really is important because when hearing of these things on the news or witnessing them, it takes a minute, right? And it deserves time. You deserve time to process, and it's really important. Also, surround yourself with whatever it is that gives you the energy and courage to stay in it for the long term. I call that going to the gas station, and because that's just as crucial as showing up in some of the more or overt forms of activism and organizing. The other thing I would say is be open to learning and unlearning. For me, this has been a crucial part of finding unexpected allies and protecting important boundaries. And also now that when I think about unlearning, you know, some of the students that I get to work with who are fantastic, some students had this feeling when the APIDA community came under scrutiny, or people wanted to come to the aid of the APIDA community, is that they felt embarrassed. And after talking with them, this is something I understand too, is they had this feeling of not wanting to be a burden, and it was really deep inside of them. And so just saying everything's fine, don't look at us, everything's good, and watching those students sort of unlearn that and take control of how they really felt. So unlearning is a big thing for myself as well.
Yeah, thank you all so much for reflecting and kind of giving your advice and your experience to the audience and to each other and to me as well. I think that we did touch a little bit on what activism has looked like in a virtual world. And I appreciate kind of that insight, especially with the way the world has been in the past year. I think there are a lot of pros and cons to that kind of activism and education. I want to kind of throw a question that might be a little bit abstract into the mix here. So as we think about coming together, this rising tide of hopefully liberation, what do you think that our collective liberation really looks like? Grace says a party, and Lillian added Asian lady parties.
I think it looks like, as much as possible, you know, living in a world, wow, so deep, hold up, yeah. Cries, where, yeah, like where there's no hope, no fear in that sense. Or yeah, no fear, but also like no feeling the need to assimilate to whiteness in order to be successful, or not having to, you know, not having to assimilate in order to survive, which is something that I know coming to Cal Poly, something that I had to do. Well, I felt like I had to do, not had to do, because you don't have to do that, but something that I felt like I had to do so like adamantly my first year, right? And you know, in the world, it's like on a larger scale, right? So I think this collective liberation just looks like being true to yourself. Very, very, I feel like a teen movie. Being true to yourself, but also like being able to learn more about yourself and learn more about where you come from as much as possible, and without the fear of being judged by others, and also without feeling the need to assimilate to whiteness in order to become successful, or in order to become accepted, because, you know, that's not it. Yeah, so that's kind of where I was going with it. Yeah, I feel like a Disney Channel original, like dun 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 type of thing going on. But yeah, that's basically what I personally think of as collective liberation. I know there's probably a lot more in-depth answers and a lot more that has to do with organizing, but like in a philosophical stance, that's kind of where my head is at. But yeah.
Yeah, and I thank you. I'm really asking you all to like share your dreams, right? Share your visions of the future, share what you think we could be if we weren't always focused on whiteness and what that has done to us and our communities.
The party metaphor was not, it was not totally a joke. You know, because I think it's about, and Alex, I see in there that they put in, or not, the space to exist freely without expectation, right? Like collective liberation means not having to deal with the, excuse my language, shit, right? Like the shit that we've had to deal with. The fear, right? Even if nothing's happening, that fear. And so the party metaphor isn't just about like feeling safe, like you should feel safe, but you should also like thrive and enjoy, and your cup is always full, right? Your plate is always full, and you're cared for, you know, people are looking out for you. And it's a celebration, it's a good time, right?
I think like the first step towards collective liberation would literally just be every single person on earth acknowledging internalized racism and how they benefit from systems of oppression. That would literally make a world of difference. And I don't even know what that would look like. But it would really take, I think, a lot of the burden off of BIPOC individuals to be doing all of the work to help themselves if other people wanted to help them and if we all just helped each other. But yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think this question gets asked sometimes, and I see other panelists struggle with it in other state of events or other panels. And so I'm not sure I can do this question justice. I think Camille was really speaking some powerful truth. And I think if we could be in a space where state of events are not needed to understand the inequities and need of our communities, I think that answer to this question is going to be answered by future generations. And I know that sounds like a cop-out, but that's what I believe. I'm also concerned that I don't have a really concrete answer because I worry that if I can't articulate that, then I don't know where we're going. So I'm just being vulnerable there and really trying to take that question in and yeah, that's what I got for that one.
Yeah, thank you. And I want to acknowledge too, it's very hard to know where we're going. We don't have a map and no one has given it to us. And we're kind of like creating that as we go along the way, right? And I think that's a very brave thing to do for any of us who are involved in this work and involved in this dreaming of what the future, not only for us, but for our ancestors, our descendants can look like. Yeah. So I would like to move on to the next question. Something that Anusha highlighted is this idea that BIPOC communities are often expected to help themselves. So how can we turn that around? And the question is, what do you want to see from Cal Poly in support of APIDA community members and towards equity on campus? And what does allyship or being an accomplice look like to you? In the chat, Camille said, what do I want to see from Cal Poly? And she's unscrolling her scroll.
Sorry, that was really vague. It's just because throughout my time at Cal Poly, I've been in a lot of conversation about what Cal Poly can do, not only for APIDA folks, but just for folks in marginalized communities. And I've heard a lot of things and I agree with a large majority of them. So I'm just trying to compile my thoughts so I don't sound strange. But I just feel like, you know, unfortunately, this world runs on money. Sorry, Lily, and we can't topple capitalism anytime soon. I know it's your dream, but sorry. But I just feel like, you know, a lot of ways in which I just feel like more attention should be put onto, I don't want to compare it to any other organization on campus or anything like that for liability's sake. But I do want to say that I feel like a lot of the allocation of money and budgeting that's available to underrepresented and marginalized students, though it is available and though it is there needs to be a lot more done in that sense if possible. Like, you know, a lot of folks are dropping things in the chat, like open centers, yes, please, open centers, scholarships, yes, please. Like, you know, there are a lot of folks that are struggling right now, especially, and also like hiring more APIDA staff, yes, please, because I'm an engineering major and I only know like two APIDA engineering professors that I've ever encountered, and I haven't even had them for a class yet, unfortunately. And also like having staff and faculty go through more trainings and more opportunities for them to be more aware on how to be more inclusive in their spaces as they interact with students and interact with each other. There's so many things that Cal Poly can do that I feel like haven't been done yet. And coming from a treasurer's perspective, oh yeah, I'm the treasurer of PCE right now. So my brain is like money, 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 money. It's just like that allocation of money. Like there are a lot of departments and there are a lot of compartments of Cal Poly that are more well-known and more well-funded than others. And that's especially like evident in how Cal Poly regulates centers that want to help support the success of underrepresented and marginalized students on campus. So though money can actually buy so much happiness, contrary to the popular belief, that's still something that I feel like Cal Poly can do a way better job at in terms of allocating those funds to help support students of all backgrounds rather than focusing on certain other things. Give me the MCC. But yeah, that's just my 2 cents. Hopefully that didn't sound strange, but yes.
I think I'm where Camille is at. I have a list. You know, but it comes down to people and money, right? Budget decisions. It's an expression of the university's value, right? And you know, I'm hopeful that different decisions will be made, you know, in terms of figuring out how to allocate those sources, especially because it looks like we're not in a crisis in the same way that we might have imagined a year ago. But yes, we have to have good hiring. I think a couple years ago for the state of APIDA, I had mentioned a stat in terms of Cal Poly is a ANAPISI, you know, recognized as an ANAPISI institution, meaning we're I don't know the metric, but we're supposed to be Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander serving, I believe. It doesn't quite feel like that. So I feel like we need to match that name at least. But the stat that I pointed out is in terms of the children being born, you know, right now or in this last year, there's something like 70 to 80% babies of color. But then you look at the demographics at Cal Poly and, you know, in 18 years when the children being born now in the state of California are applying to colleges like Cal Poly, are they the ones that will feel like they're served? Are they the ones that are gonna feel like they're represented here? And, you know, I don't think we're anywhere near that. It's the metric is totally, or the measurement, right? Or the stats, totally reversed. So we still got a lot of work to do in terms of student recruitment and retention, faculty, staff recruitment and retention. And that's just the people, right? Then there's also just the education component. Could we have an Asian American studies? I mean, major would be a huge thing to ask, but like, could we even have a minor? You know, if it's like, how many faculty do we have now that can teach a whole entire course focused on Asian American, Pacific Islander, Desi American experiences and histories, right? And I don't think it would be a stretch, and it shouldn't be, not the state that we're in.
Could I possibly add something? Sorry, y'all. Something that Professor Ye said kind of stuck out to me in terms of the word value. So in this capitalist society, value equals value. So when I say value, I'm talking about, of course, the value of money, but I'm also talking about the value that organizations hold, that institutions hold, and that people hold. So, you know, I know a lot of what we're talking about in terms of resources and in terms of what we want to see on campus involves money, and that's not being given to us right now. It's being allocated to other things that, you know, Cal Poly determines is of more value, and that's just how it is, right? In a sense. I think this sounded a lot better in my head, but just to kind of close out on that, the things that Cal Poly values and the things that, coming from a student's perspective, the things that Cal Poly values are the things that are allocated higher budgets, are the things that are more emphasized in leadership, the things that are more, that people are more excited to see, like the general population of Cal Poly, right? And the things that are people more excited to see are, you know, advertised in a way, or like shown in a way of grandeur, or shown in a way that requires a lot of money to budget, a lot of money to have, and a lot of money to hold, right? So, you know, if resources or if initiatives that support underrepresented and marginalized communities aren't held to that standard, like, or aren't given that amount of value, whether it be like, you know, money value or like virtue value or like importance value, then, you know, how would I feel as a student like that I'm not valuable, right? You know what I mean? So that's kind of something that I kind of wanted to put out there, like as a person that identifies with marginalized communities on Cal Poly's campus, the fact that we don't have those resources, it kind of sucks, right? And it makes me personally, as a student of color, as a queer student of color on campus, feel like invaluable. And, you know, that's something that I would hate to have any other student, whether they be, you know, a fifth year, a first year incoming student, feel on a Cal Poly campus. So that's just something that I wanted to put out there. I don't know if that holds much relevance to the conversation, but that's something that I've been wanting to kind of put out there for a bit. But yes, thank you.
Yeah, something that I'll name is I've heard a lot of students say that it's really hard for them to be proud of Cal Poly. And I think that's something that we need to think about as we move forward with Grace's question of the students who will be applying in 18 years, right? Even if we're different, then will they be able to be proud of the history of their institution? And so I think it's so urgent and so important for us to not lose any momentum and not take any steps forward or backwards and keep moving forwards, because I think we want to look to a future where students of marginalized identities can feel proud to be here. I am going to pose our last kind of question that we have for you all from us. Please feel free to continue answering as well things that you want from Cal Poly. I think that's really important, but I don't want to end off on speaking to the white majority. So my question here is, what are the biggest opportunities that APIDA students, faculty, and staff might have at Cal Poly or within the APIDA community here? What are the resources or sources of strength for our community? I will also remind anyone that if you have audience questions, so please direct message them to me and I will get to those after this question portion.
I can go ahead. So some of the things I was thinking about with this question is I think our biggest opportunities can be found in the ways that we create space, take space, and reimagine space. I think all of us can play a part collectively and individually to create spaces like this, right? In which our identities can be celebrated and seen. And so when I say take space, I'm mostly thinking about the students I serve and the way they lean into their cultural pride to take space through their activism and their cultural organizations, and empowering their peers to find their voice. And I think this, I'm kind of thinking about the previous question too, what can Cal Poly do? And so you know, I love to advocate for my students and always will. And so I'm going to use this opportunity to say that the United Sorority and Fraternity Council is a smaller council than Panhellenic and IFC. And so there's about 150 students in this cultural. USFC houses our cultural organizations. And oftentimes, USFC for short, is left out of the conversation. And it's kind of in the shadow of IFC and Panhellenic. And I want the university to recognize these student organizations. These are amazing, fantastic students and organizations that advocate for each other. They're fierce. They can articulate their experience. And I want to make sure that they're part of the conversation on a university level all of the time. So that was my there. Thank you for letting me say that.
Thank you for saying it.
I just want to echo what Kanani was saying, you know, this idea that, I mean, basically you're describing there's many Cal Polys, you know, there's like these parallel worlds and existences, and there's ones that are part of the conversation, and then there's the many that are not part of that conversation. And I think that's the, you know, that's the, I guess I would say that's Cal Poly's problem, you know, because what Kanani was saying is these students that are left out of the conversation are fierce, right? Like they are the ones that I feel like should be the exemplars, the model, right? Of what community could look like. And so one of the strengths and biggest opportunities I feel like we have here is the, like we're talking about incredibly smart, incredibly resourceful, because you have to be community and the strength of that community. And I think that that is the biggest strength and opportunity here. But, you know, they aren't necessarily heard, right? Because they don't fit into, I think, what we think of when we think of Cal Poly. You know, and I know that the university is doing work, but I just think how there's like, talked about this in the one of the ES classes that Camille was in, but how important or potentially powerful something like chismis or gossip can be. But I think that's just what you call it when it's not official communication. And so that's just reflective of like the strength of communication and connection, communication in terms of what's building that community and defining that culture. Like it's almost too simple just to call it like informal or unrecognized or unheard. I think it's just so much more than that.
Kanani touched on this, and I don't know how like radical this idea is, but I really don't see the value, I guess, in Greek life in the way that it is right now. I think that it has a very racist history in general. And I just think that it needs to be reimagined, using again, a word that Kanani said, it needs to be like reworked and like created in a way that it's more inclusive, and a way to do that is to just get rid of it and like recreate it. In my opinion, that's something that could be seen on Cal Poly's campus and other campuses. Because literally like when I came here, like the first time I came to Cal Poly's campus as one of the, like I attended PCW, which is Polycultural Weekend. And literally on that first night, there was an incident with like a group of frat guys, and they made like a hateful racist comment towards the group I was in, and I was in ISA, which is the Indian Student Association. So like right off the bat coming here, I felt unsafe because of the fraternity that I didn't even know. So I think that could be like a little small, I think a small thing that we could do to make people feel safer here. And another thing is just, this is easier said than done, but just like offering more opportunities to BIPOC communities in terms of like jobs and resources. People have talked about that, but elevating voices is one thing, and it's really important, but following through and having opportunities and constant opportunities, because you know, like other my white peers, they have connections and things like that. And I'm one of the only POC in my major, and I don't have any connections. My parents don't even like know what graphic design is. So it's like, I don't have an aunt in the field like the person sitting next to me does. So it's very daunting. And I think that just offering like internships that have preference to BIPOC communities and things like that could be important, but that's easier said than done. Obviously, it's just my 2 cents.
I kind of wanted to build off of this question, talking about like community and the strength that it has provided for me in a sense. I also wanted to build off of what Professor Ye was saying, like, you know, it feels like Cal Poly has so many different worlds. I know from personal experience, like when I'm walking on campus, it feels so strange. Like I'm on campus, like, you know, you see me and I'm quiet. I have my AirPods in. I'm just walking to class, unless I'm with like, you know, my peers and my friends. And, you know, you see this like, you know, person just walking. But when I'm in spaces where I feel comfortable, where I feel welcomed, like for those of y'all who are familiar with me and my antics, I am quite a loud person. I am very opinionated, as many of y'all have had the opportunity to see today. And I'm, you know, I feel like the communities that I found, the communities that I found on Cal Poly have really helped me to be more like that, to be who I am today, as corny as it sounds. But, you know, the way that Cal Poly is, I feel like for me, it was a really hard time trying to find those communities where I belonged. It took me a really long time, just because I was also facing this barrier of trying to be more white. You know, like, you know, I was a part of something I'm still currently a part of. And it's just like, you know, a lot of things that I tried to focus on was to get away from exploring my individuality, exploring my culture, exploring my sexuality, just exploring like who I am as a person. A lot of that was being pushed away by, you know, the forefront of my mind, like I need to be white, right? So I was able to get out of that just because of the community that I found. Like, you know, I started off as a CCE WOWie, then I lost my way in a sense. I came back as a CCE WOW leader. I'm a part of PCE, and like I'm a student assistant MCC. Like there's so many organizations, opportunities that I've had the opportunity to work with and be a part of that have made me feel like I belong at Cal Poly. But on the flip side, I feel like that feeling of me initially wanting to be more white and doing things that made me feel more white was unnecessary. Yeah, and that's just kind of where it was. Like, I feel like if I didn't have that in mind, I would have been able to start earlier. And that kind of idea came up as a product of the environment that I was in. I wanted to be a part of the demographic, right? Without fully realizing that there was a whole other demographic in Cal Poly that is way more accepting to me and my respective identities. So yeah, and that's kind of where I found the strength to do a lot of things that I like to do today. You know, I'm just really thankful to those communities. But also being a part of those communities, it's really important to acknowledge that there's a lot of work that still needs to be done. I hold cultural organizations at Cal Poly to the highest extent of praise just because I'm a part of them, but also within the cultural organizations, there's a lot of work that needs to be done too. Like, you know, there are more organizations having these conversations and more organizations being intersectional with their conversations and talking about how it affects the wider span of the world and talking about collective liberation, which is amazing, which is great. And there are so many organizations like that that even had those conversations beforehand. But there are still some organizations and some aspects of, you know, clubs that need to work on integrating these conversations into their everyday programming. Just because they touch the lives of so many people, that it's really important that the people that they serve are aware that they find talking about collective liberation and talking about uplifting the voices of marginalized communities as a part of, or the forefront of importance that their organization holds, like using their influence and using their power in order to really spread these messages and advocate using their privilege as organizations that, you know, people are aware of to advocate. So yeah, kind of long-winded, but yes.
Yeah, I think you've touched on so many of the layers and the complexities of the experience at Cal Poly, and I really appreciate Camille, you for kind of speaking at length to that. I want to thank all of our panelists for being here tonight, for being vulnerable, for allowing us to learn from you, your knowledge, your experiences, and just to affirm that those have been so valuable and that I feel so privileged and so humbled to have been in the presence of just you all as people and everything that you've brought to the space. So what we're going to do as a closing before I hand it off to Lillian is I'm going to ask everyone who is in attendance to put a commitment in the chat. So if you are part of a marginalized community, please commit to yourself, commit to living as your authentic self, and commit to joy and resistance and radicalism in your life. If you are a white person who has shown up to be an ally, please commit to what you are doing to continue to grow and learn and support communities of color who you want to support. And I will pass it back to Lillian to do a few closing announcements.
Yes, thank you so much, Olivia, for moderating, and to all of our amazing and beautiful and super powerful panelists for just sharing your truths and being, you know, super unapologetic about your experiences and what you need and what you want and what you dream for. I hope that we are here to see some of those dreams come to fruition in the long-term future. Thank you to everyone who's been here. I know it's been a long event on a Tuesday night during week 6. I threw the assessment survey in the chat and would love if you all could take a few minutes to just share feedback during your free time. It's a really short survey, just want to get a sense of how this event impacted you and what you're taking away from this event. Also, we are doing a giveaway. So we are giving away 2 books. For this event, we're giving away Kathy Park Hong's Minor Feelings, as well as 5 of our limited edition APIDA Heritage Month 2021 t-shirts. Trying to make it sound a lot fancier than it actually is. And we'll be able to ship that to you and everything. Thank you to ASI for being able to sponsor us. I feel like I'm in a YouTube video now, but yeah, we already drew kind of names from the people who are still here, so that we were able to pick them out ahead of time. And I am happy to announce that our winners are John Lee, you win the book. Karina Mealy, you win the book as well. I'm so sorry if I pronounce your names incorrectly. Feel free to connect me. Angie Rico Yeast, Elizabeth Chan Diaz, Sabine Haid, Akimi Navarro, and Ho Chul Yang have all won our t-shirts as well. I'm going to throw your names in the chat in case I mispronounce and you did not recognize your own name. I'm so sorry. And then I will need you all to email me your t-shirt size and your address so that I could give you your book and your t-shirts. And if you didn't win today, don't feel sad. We have so many more events and so many more giveaways. We have like a lot. So if you continue to stay engaged, we would love to see you at our future events. We have a whole calendar of things, but the most immediate one is the one on Thursday with the National Asian American Pacific Islander Mental Health Association, and they'll be here, you know, talking about mental health and the impact of Asian Americans and how you can kind of like step in as a bystander when someone is experiencing harm and harassment. And this event was actually born out of a final project that Olivia and my students did in our class last quarter. So it's super exciting and really would love to see you all there. Let me look at my list of other announcements. Follow our Instagram to stay engaged with all of our upcoming programs and events. If you engage with us on Instagram, we also are doing weekly raffles for additional t-shirts and giveaways. So like, comment, share your story. all that good stuff. The drill. Pretend like we're influencers here giving away really awesome stuff. No discount codes to anything, but still really cool limited edition t-shirts and books. And with that, thank you all so much. We are going to upload this recording onto our YouTube channel. I dropped our YouTube link, so you can feel free to subscribe and be able to check this out later on, or share with your community and friends and family as well. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful evening. Bye.